Hello and welcome to the Genius of Technology. I'm Hilary Viner, CEO of Genius 100 Foundation. On behalf of the extraordinary Genius 100 team, founder Rami Kleinman, Global Ambassador Ido Aharoni, and Chief Community Officer Helen Hatzis, thank you so much for making the time to join us, either for the first time or again, for this very special Genius 100 Foundation event. And we want to give a special thank you to our new sponsor of the Genius of series, BST Canada and Alatanus, founding member of our community, president of Genius 100 Foundation Canada, and global G100 board member, for your generous support. We are delighted and honored to see so many Genius 100 visionaries and members of our Genius 100 community from so many places around the world. And it's great to see so many students joining us today from all over, including American University, NYU, IDC Herzliya, and grade schoolers from various places around the US. We certainly have a packed virtual house today. Today marks the second episode of our new Genius of series, which exemplifies that we as an organization are inspired by Einstein to bring together accomplished, compassionate minds to reimagine the future and improve our world. Each month, the Genius of will highlight one or more of our illustrious, world-renowned G100 visionaries. This brilliant group is comprised of global leaders, activists, innovators, and influencers, of which 16 are Nobel laureates. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Which brings me to today's episode, an extraordinary treat by any definition. On that note, here's the rundown. I will try my best to briefly introduce G100 visionary Don Tapscott and Scott Shay. Not an easy feat, but I'll do my best. Then Scott and Don will have a one-on-one conversation about the second era of the digital age, how blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and digital assets, such as NFTs, will drive business and social innovation for the next half century, and how we can all manage the dark side of this rapidly changing ecosystem. And here's where you come in. We will be fielding questions from the audience at the conclusion of the conversation, so please don't forget to submit questions via the Q&A option located within your Zoom panel. At the conclusion of the Q&A, I'll be back to close things out and share some special announcements. So, without further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Don Tapscott and Scott Shay. Don Tapscott is a legendary technology theorist, one of the world's leading authorities on the impact of technology on business and society, having authored 18 books and counting that have inspired millions and been translated into over 25 languages so far. He has coined many concepts that are part of today's tech-forward lexicon and is sought out by corporate and government leaders around the globe. He is co-founder and executive chairman of the Blockchain Research Institute, an adjunct professor at INSEAD, and recently a two-term chancellor of Trent University in Ontario, member of the Order of Canada, and we are very proud to call him one of our G100 visionaries. Scott Shay is a leading global businessman, thought leader, and author of several widely read books on the profound issues facing the Jewish community. He is the co-founder and chairman of Signature Bank, well known as one of the top banks for private business, and as a leader in the emerging digital currency ecosystem, and a very special member of our Genius 100 community. Scott, Don, take it away.
Thank you, Hilary. It's really a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be Don's interlocutor, because I actually have unaided awareness of Don from his prolific writing. And the first book I read of his actually was The Naked Corporation, which unlocked a lot of, frankly, what was happened for the past, 16, 17 years in terms of corporations becoming radically transparent, because in terms of stakeholders from all sides, from colleagues, employees, clients, and it was really a book that I took to heart. And so when I first had the opportunity to meet Don, at least virtually in person, It was a real pleasure because Don has stayed really at the forefront of what's happening next, which is why I think you'll all get a lot of insight from this conversation. So I want to start, Don, with asking you, frankly, the first question I get whenever I try to describe Signet or our signature, our blockchain activities and our own digital dollar, which is, people say, well, what is this thing? Is this just like another computer program? Why is it special? So, Don, let's start very basic, that in a way that everybody can understand. And you're the best at doing that.
Well, thanks for the kind words, Scott, and I look forward to this conversation. I look forward to hearing what I have to say, actually. Yeah, Mark Twain says to a friend, I'm sorry I wrote such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short letter. So it's actually taken me about 3 years to be able to explain this in, I don't know, 90 seconds. So let's turn on our, I'll turn off my phone. Sorry about that. Turn on our watches and see if I can do this. So I think of blockchain as a new internet, an internet of value. And for 40 years, we've had an internet of information. But if I send you some information, as I've done, an email, a deck, photograph, I'm actually not sending you the information. I'm sending you a copy. And even with a website, I keep the original. That works great for information. But when it comes to assets, things of value that belong to somebody, like money or securities or intellectual property or the data in our identities, or cultural assets like art or music, or a vote's an asset, something of value that belongs to somebody. When it comes to assets, copying those, it's not a good idea. You don't want someone copying your vote or your identity. And if I send you $1,000, it's really important that I don't still have the money, right? So cryptographers have called this the double spend problem for decades. And the way that we manage this problem in our economy is through intermediaries, middlemen, banks, stock exchanges, credit card companies, transfer agents, social media companies. And they perform all of the business and transaction logic for every type of commerce. They clear and settle transactions. They identify the parties and the assets. They keep records. And overall, they've done a pretty good job, but there are growing problems, which I'd be happy to get into, but it's not within the 90 seconds. So what if there were not just an internet of information? What if there were an internet of value? Some kind of vast global distributed ledger where anything of value, from money to music to a vote, could be managed, stored, transacted in a secure and private way. Well, that's what Satoshi Nakamoto cracked. In 2008, Satoshi cracked the double spend problem. And this was a really big deal when he invented Bitcoin, wrote a paper on this, or she, or they. And the reason that this is such a big deal is because Bitcoin was really the first app of this internet of value, kind of like email was the first app of the internet of information. But now there are all these new platforms that have come out where you can build any app. So now, for the first time in human history, people globally on a large scale can manage, store, transact, communicate assets, things of value, peer-to-peer. And trust is not achieved by an intermediary. It's achieved by cryptography and collaboration and some clever code. So this is an internet of value. I think it's a bigger deal than the internet of information.
So let me ask you there. The second question that people ask these days, and it touches on your notion that you're sending copies, is NFTs, non-fungible tokens, and there's been some NFT auctions that have been eye-popping in terms of dollars. What, and then we're going to drill down a little bit into these topics, but what makes NFTs special? Why is it so important that I have a copy that I have the original copy on my server someplace in the Amazon cloud?
Well, NFTs are one of actually 9 types of digital assets. So you can have money, that's an asset that all these things are becoming digitized. You could have a security, stocks, bonds. There was a $4 billion IPO, it's called an ICO, initial coin, that had no investment bank, no stock market, no stock. People were buying tokens representing a share of a company. You could have natural asset tokens or assets like a carbon credit. Carbon credits are being tokenized, and that holds the potential of finally solving this problem of climate change. And similar, NFTs started out as the tokenization of art. So, and it's quite a simple idea. And if I send you a Bitcoin, one Bitcoin is identical to the other Bitcoin. They are fungible. It's like $1 equals $1. They're the same. Whereas when it comes to certain classes of assets, they're non-fungible. They're unique. There's only one Mona Lisa. And until blockchain, you could never create art or other cultural assets online because they were easily copied. You create a great drawing, well, someone could copy it. Whereas with blockchain, you create a great drawing or a piece of art or an animation or a video or anything, music, and that cannot be copied. It's actually virtually impossible to copy these things. The analogy I use is it's because a blockchain is a highly processed thing. It's sort of like a chicken McNugget, and you know, it would be like turning a chicken McNugget back into a chicken. And now no one knows how to do that yet, but eventually maybe it'll be possible, but not for now. Actually, unfortunately, John Oliver on late night TV got a hold of that analogy of mine. He had some fun with it. It was pretty good. He says, "Oh, that would be a terrible thought. That chicken would be bleeped up, be suffering from PTSD and writing haunting poetry. The things I saw, buck, buck, buck off. My body is whole, but what of my soul?" Anyway. So an NFT can represent any digital asset, but it can also represent physical assets as well. So you can have an NFT that's essentially a little piece of software, a token that says you own something in the physical world. So you own a carbon credit, or it could be you own an instrument or a piece of land or whatever. So this is quite an extraordinary thing, and that's why there's so much excitement about it.
So let's dig in a little deeper. I mean, everybody has been fascinated, for better or for worse, by some of the dollar prices on various either prices for cryptocurrencies or prices for NFTs. But what do you see as the real long-term opportunities for using this blockchain technology? Is it cryptocurrencies? Is it NFTs? Is it the ability to register properties and to enable the rest of commerce? Where do you see the main opportunities for folks who are looking to invest in the digital in this emerging nascent digital economy?
Well, this is the blindfolded person and the elephant. And it's sort of all of the above, Scott. It's everything you mentioned, plus a whole bunch more. So let's, I don't know, we're at the Blockchain Research Institute, we're studying 14 different industries and how
Mhm.
this technology is changing them. So a big one, obviously, where people start is the financial services industry. I mean, banks and the whole industry as a whole actually does some simple things. They move money and assets, stocks, whatever. They store value, they exchange value with markets, they insure value, they invest value. Now using this technology, software can replace every one of those things that banks do. Now that's not going to happen, but in theory, that can happen. The banks, the signature banks, a great example, are working hard to, reinvent themselves and exploit this new opportunity. But value can now be stored on a network. I mean, there are $3 trillion roughly in digital assets that are stored on these networks. They can be moved. You and I can do a transaction. We can create markets. There are completely decentralized markets that don't really have a company in the traditional sense. They're a network with software. One is called Uniswap, and it has a treasury of over $10 billion, which makes it, that treasury is the size of one of the top 20 corporations in America. So ensuring value. If I own a bunch of these digital assets, it's something as easy, simple as Bitcoin, or let's say something like Ether, okay, for the blockchain Ethereum. And I can actually borrow money to buy other assets based on my ownership of that ETH. And I'm not going to get a margin call from my broker saying you have to sell something because you're getting over leveraged, because there's something called a smart contract that makes sure that I can never get over leveraged. So, I mean, the entire industry could be transformed. I'll just give you one other as a quick example. Supply chains. How can this be? In 2022, one of the biggest challenges facing our countries are supply chains. Now, we have an additional problem right now in Canada because a bunch of protesters are blocking the border to the United States. But these are big, complicated things, and they use traditional technology. So you got planes and boats and trains and trucks, and you got all these different parties and contractors, and there are borders and escrow agents, and you got traditional systems like ERP or EDI. You've got information moving around in emails, and faxes, and phone calls, and paper. What if all of that were a shared network state, a single ledger? You could have a single version of the truth. You could know where everything is at any point in time. There would be no 3-day settlement for transactions because the payment and the settlement's the same activity. It's just a change to the ledger. You could have a real-time supply chain. You could have smart money. So you do a certain thing, and the money automatically, is paid if it meets the terms of a smart contract. So, the same thing is true across many industries: manufacturing, healthcare. We're looking at government, many different industries. So the internet, it brought about lots of big changes. It also created lots of problems too. I'm happy to get into that if you want, but there's a fragmentation of public discourse as a result of the internet. I thought the internet would bring us together. I said it could go the other way, and it did. And there are many, many other problems. So,
is he in a guitar shop? Like where?
So I'd like to, someone is unmuted, I think me.
Yeah.
So let me just take that as a segue though, which is, and you've touched upon the role of banks and how transactions can happen without banks. I'm not gonna expand this to too many other concepts because I want to dig a little deeper into some of the things we discussed, but there's one more that's critical and also that people are hearing about a lot, which is DeFi, decentralized finance. And that would sort of be the last well, the second to the last leg in terms of explaining this world. There's one more leg we have to go to, but can you say a word or two about DeFi and whether and let me let you talk about it.
Sure. Well, most people have heard the word fintech. Fintech is my son, co-author, Alex Tapscott, describes it as digital wallpaper. It's just like you have the old house, you put some new wallpaper on, whereas DeFi is replacing everything that the financial industry does with decentralized networks. Now, again, and Alex will be the first to tell you that this is not going to happen because banks are in danger of being disintermediated, but they're working hard to re-intermediate, if I can pull up a term from the digital economy, which I wrote in 1994, to create new value in the middle. But this is absolutely happening. DeFi is one of the fastest growing industries in the world, maybe ever. And it's gone from nothing to tens of billions of dollars overnight. And it shows no signs of stopping. So you can bet that every bank is all over this, trying to figure out what's the threat and also what's the opportunity. And there are lots of opportunities in this as well.
So the last leg I want to put on this discussion before we dig a little deeper on some of these issues and talk about challenges is CBDC, Central Bank Digital Currency. This is an acronym that nobody knew just 3 years ago, frankly.
Yeah.
And now it's there are literally hearings in Congress. Yesterday, there were hearings yesterday. There are due to be hearings next week in front of the Senate, the House. There are papers being distributed. I spoke to the Senate Banking Committee about 10 days ago to some members there, and it's the center of attention. Can you tell our participants and our colleagues on at Genius 100 what is CBDC and can it change everything?
Well, right now, prior to CBDC.
By the way, I should mention you've made recommendations on this to the Biden administration. I
have indeed. So we are up until the CBDC idea, which by the way, we introduced in Blockchain Revolution 6 years ago. But prior to that, there were two types of cryptocurrencies. There were the community-based currencies like Bitcoin that just kind of happened. And then there are the corporate currencies, and they've been really slow to take off. Facebook started by launching something called Libra, which became DM. And because everybody hates Facebook, they kind of bailed on that, and they're going with a different strategy. But a third category is the CBDC, Central Bank Digital Currency, which means turning our fiat currencies, the dollar,
our paper dollars, our checkbook dollars. I just want to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. Okay.
The yen, the dollar, the euro, the peso, the RMB in China, turning those into digital currencies. And you think, well, don't we already have digital currencies? I don't hardly ever use cash. Well, actually, no, we don't. The current banking system creates a representation of money, but it's not an actual digital currency. Like if I pull some cash out of my pocket, it's a bearer instrument. I am the bearer of that cash. And because I am the bearer of the cash, I own the cash. This is creating digital cash so that the money itself actually moves around. And there's a big upside for central banks to do this. And which is why the Fed right now is, in the US has launched a big thing, and the Canadian government, or the Central Bank of Canada has actually been a leader in trying to sort this out. And if they were to launch this, it would give them all kinds of tools that they don't currently have. Now, there's a dark side. I'll get to that in a sec. But you could put money into the money supply, and you could see what happens. Are people spending more? Are they saving more? Are they investing, or
Well,
whatever.
that's the dark side. You can see everything that happens every second.
Well, if it's designed that way, it could be designed differently so that you still have the visibility, and as you said earlier, Scott, the transparency, but you don't invade people's privacy. So all of this is anonymized. But you could do other that. Ultimately, you could have a lighter touch on regulation because you could use transparency to help ensure the integrity of financial markets. You know, as I said in Naked Corporation, thanks for reading that book. Not a lot of
great
people
book.
did. It was kind of a study in bad timing. I think my mother bought a lot of those copies, but it's a good book if you read it today.
It's a good book. I recommend it.
But as we said, the sunlight can be the best disinfectant. We said you make financial institutions naked, and there are some corollaries that flow from that. One of them is fitness is no longer optional. You know, if you're going to be naked, you better get buff. So they could have a lighter touch on regulation. There could be all kinds of benefits to the central banks. You want to give money to the entire population in, say, a pandemic or something. You could helicopter drop it onto the mobile devices of all the bottom 30% of the population or something like that. The dark side, of course, is, as you were alluding, that this can be implemented in a way that seriously undermines the basic rights to privacy, for starters. People say to me, well, Don, privacy's dead. Get over it. You know, if you got nothing to hide, what's your problem? This is stupidity in my mind. I mean, privacy is the foundation of freedom. And if you want to see how this can be problematic, you look at China today. So the China already has something called the social score, which was created, to help governments make sure that people paid their parking tickets and stuff like that. But now it's a platform that monitors all kinds of activities of people. And maybe you do something wrong. You buy a radical magazine, or heaven forbid you go on a demonstration. All of a sudden your kid doesn't get into a good school. You don't really know why. So their implementation of the central bank digital currency is called the DCEP. It's a digital RMB, and they're starting to roll this out around the world, and into Vietnam and Southeast Asia, into Africa, across One Belt, One Road, linking Hong Kong and Rotterdam. And if they do that, they will replace the US dollar as the currency of record. And so that's why the Fed is, hands wringing, gnashing, and so on, and very concerned about this. You have people like Chris Giancarlo, who was the former head of the CFTC, the big commodities future trading commission in the US, former chairman, is now heading something called the Digital Dollar Project. And his view is the reason to do this is not just to save the US dollar and its hegemony in the world, it's to save freedom, because that we need an implementation of these things that addresses the kinds of issues that you raised.
So these are all important issues, and as an introduction, and I want to recommend also, while I'm recommending your books, and Don, you're one of those people who have written more books than most people have read. I would also recommend for a short snack, your TED Talk. I think it was in 2014 or so, 2016, something like that.
Yeah.
And it was one of the most highly watched TED Talks ever, where you gave an introduction to the blockchain economy. But I want to go on. I want to talk about a little bit of the challenges, which I'll frankly give Signet, which is we started, and one thing that we talked about is I was an early follower of blockchain and crypto technologies, and we started our own digital dollar that we launched at midnight on 2019, and last quarter, that digital dollar, which could be compared to a stable coin, last quarter transacted $237 billion in one quarter. Now, the thing that I find interesting is that none of those people really want, who are transacting, really want to have their, to manage their private keys, to manage sort of the secret sauce. They actually, for better or for worse, and I'm not judging right now, they prefer that banks, make sure that they're transacting with other trustworthy people, make sure that the bank sort of knows who the recipients and the senders are. And so the trust factor of a regulated entity, for better or for worse, seems to have some economic value, because at the same time, those same folks are perfectly capable of transacting on a stable coin or some other Tether, USDC, pick it.
Yeah.
So is there, and what do you see as the role for people who just say, gee, this is really complicated technology. I'm really afraid of having this decentralized financial network hacked, or I don't know who I'm dealing with. I may be dealing with Kim Jong-un. And I want some sort of trusted counterparty in the middle. How do you react to those folks?
Well, what you're describing is something called custody, and of private keys, which gives essentially custody of the digital assets, and leaving that to a trusted party. And that's called re-intermediation, the creation of new value in the middle. And my view is that this is a huge opportunity. That's an example of one of many things that financial institutions could be doing. And when I wrote The Digital Economy, and this is 1994, I developed this term disintermediation. And I said, if you're in an information industry and you're in the middle, time to do some serious career planning, because, and the example I used was, if you're a bookstore, you're between publishers and readers, and bookstores will go away. I said that. I said, but something new could get created in the middle that creates new value. I said, the problem is the leaders of the old middle are not typically the ones to create the new middle. So I don't think Barnes and Noble is going to create the new middle. And sure enough, 6 months later, a company called Amazon was incorporated. So too bad I didn't bump into Jeff and put a couple $100K into it at the time. But and it's now what, the third largest company in the world. So, but this requires leadership, and it requires strategy, and it requires people who are not locked into the old paradigm. And happy to get into that if you want.
So where do you see the and this is there's another issue, and it sort of touches on this, is some people who are concerned about, on the one hand, the anonymity of the blockchain world. We just read about $3.6 billion being recovered from a couple who had hacked into Bitfinex. And I think, tens of billions over time have been utilized. So there is a concern, even though it's a small portion of the total, there is a concern that you could inadvertently be part of nefarious activities. Let's just put it that way. How do you react to that? And can that be fixed within the blockchain technology? Can protection somehow be built in without trusted intermediaries or non-trusted intermediaries?
Okay, well, let me unpack that, because I think you asked three things. So first of all, can stuff be hacked? It's hard to hack a blockchain, but you build a business on a blockchain, you're creating your own software, and you better create good software, because any business can be hacked. So, it's possible to hack a business, an exchange, for example. There have been lots of examples of that. And you need to beware and be careful what businesses you trust to put your money into. Secondly, is the whole question of sort of criminal behavior. And I was just talking to Alex. He got back from rehab, where he was gave a speech to all the big sovereign wealth funds in the world. And it's a big conference for these funds. And then they brought Nouriel Roubini.
I know Nouriel. He's a great guy.
He is. He's a good guy. Very
Great guy.
nice man too, but he hates crypto and this whole thing. And also the head of the Central Bank of Pakistan that just banned Bitcoin. And they both went after Alex on this panel. And I heard from the organizers that Alex schooled them. Anyway, what he pointed out is that, yes, there is a currency that's used globally by criminals. It's called cash. You know, the US dollar, third of all cash, is probably used for nefarious transactions. Alex's research says that about 15 basis points of Bitcoin is used for criminal activity. So, and the problem is, in the example that you gave, it really shows it. These people hacked a platform, got themselves close to $400 million, and then, but they were busted because law enforcement can use the metadata to find out who the bad guys are. So really smart law enforcement loves Bitcoin and loves these cryptocurrencies better than cash. Cash is a foundation of organized crime, the global drug industry, of tax evasion, of, you know, it has a problem of evaporation and spillage. Whereas what they did is, in this case of these two people, it was a bizarre story of how they hacked this money, and then they started, you know, becoming public figures and writing songs and so on the internet. But they were able to identify the wallets. And finally, after a few years, these people started to look for ways to launder the cash. And as soon as they started moving money, they were nailed. And law enforcement just went in and took all the money. So, it's actually not true that this is some new platform for criminals. By the way, of course, criminals are going to use it. Criminals are always the first to adopt an exciting new technology, whether it's the automobile or the flip phone or whatever. And then the third thing you raised was about, well, knowing who your customer is and knowing who you're dealing with. And right now, you know, if I want to go and buy some digital asset, and I go through any kind of exchange to do that, you have to go through a pretty extensive AML KYC process. You know, they want
anti-money laundering, know your customer.
Yeah, they want to see a copy of my passport. I had one, they wanted to see my driver's license to know that my address was the address that I actually said it was. And you have to fill out all this form, and you can't be a criminal, and all kinds of other stuff. So the procedures are there. Now, having said that, there is an argument that there's a role for anonymous transactions. You know, say Saudi Arabia, you're a woman there, you want to buy a women's magazine. Or how about you're a Russian and you support Ukraine and you'd like to give money to the crowdfunding campaign. Maybe you don't want your name to be known for fear that Vladimir Putin's gonna, or his people are gonna show up and give you a rough time. So there is a role for anonymous transactions. And I know that's a controversial thing to say, but I could probably come up with hundreds of examples where it's, I think I have a right to purchase something and for nobody to know who I am.
So I want to, I mean, for everyone, you've clearly written books that have looked out years ahead. And I think everybody would like to know, I'd like to know, where you think the digital world is heading and the crypto world is heading over the next 5 years or so, both on the private side, and you've written a lot on the public side. But how do you see the next 5 years, 10 years, whatever time frame you want to associate with it, all this unfolding?
Sure. Well, I'll answer the question, but a caveat. I'm not a futurist. I think I'm of the school that the future is something to be, it's not something to be predicted, it's something to be achieved. And so I'm all about, here's a new technology, here's an opportunity, let's find a way to make it happen. But having said that, I think that this is an internet of value where assets can be moved around peer to peer, and the potential is quite huge. Now, the technology is not going to solve any problems because technology doesn't solve problems, people do. But as I said, the internet did create some big challenges, and once again, we have a new internet now. Once again, the genie, the technology genie, is out of the bottle, and I don't know. In this case, it was summoned by an anonymous person at a very uncertain time in human history, and it won't solve these problems, but it's going to give us another kick at the can to make some big changes, including to rewrite the economic power grid and the old order of things. But it's only if we will it. And there are many, many impediments. There are technology impediments as the technology is in its early stage. The internet is a network of similar networks. The internet of value is a whole bunch of networks that don't communicate, thousands of them. Now, there are new platforms, Polkadot, called the Web3, Cosmos, the internet of blockchains, and they're attempting and will solve this problem where assets can be moved across different networks. But there are technology issues like that. A really big one is the regulatory environment. We have regulators who either don't get it or they're defending the status quo, and coming down with all kinds of regulation that is inappropriate in the sense that it's going to hurt innovation and wealth creation and prosperity in their countries. If I'm right, now I could be wrong here, but I've had a pretty good history over 40 years of calling all the big ones. If I'm right, then this is the foundation for prosperity for the next half century or more. So you ban it or ban big parts of it or make it impossible for entrepreneurs to thrive, then that's not a good thing to do. So I think about my own country. I was talking to a banker recently, and I said, do you know who's the most successful startup in all of Canadian history? And they would like, I don't know, Nortel, Spotify, Shopify. Ethereum is bigger than all the Canadian banks combined. Canada drove it. It was created by a University of Waterloo student. Canada drove the whole thing out of the country because of the regulatory environment that wouldn't permit it to exist. Now, the Canadian regulatory environment has improved a lot since then, but that was a big loss. All those brilliant minds, all that economic development, all that potential to transform computer science in all our universities, all of that opportunity to, to use this engine for innovation, to reinvent government, create new models of democracy, gone. So the point, to answer your question more directly, this is a time of huge opportunity, but there are a lot of impediments, and the future will be achieved, and I'm quite determined to do whatever I can to ensure that the promise of this technology is fulfilled, and that maybe this more decentralized world that my grandchildren inherit might actually be a better one.
Well, I'm into that. I want to pivot now to questions that we've gotten from the audience, and I'm going to summarize, and I'm going to pull some together and maybe embellish a tad at times. But one question that comes up frequently is the energy consumption issue and the carbon footprint of particularly Bitcoin. Bitcoin now ranks up is ahead of Pakistan in terms of energy usage. So all of Pakistan uses a little bit less energy than the Bitcoin blockchain right now. how is that going to be? And without getting technical, the more popular Bitcoin becomes, the higher the energy usage will be because of the, as you mentioned, you have to solve mathematical problems to validate transactions. So is that a constraint? And I'm going to ask you to be a little brief in these answers because I want to cover as many questions as possible.
Sure. Well, first of all, Bitcoin does use lots of energy. Half of it comes from green sources because it's located near cheap electricity, hydroelectric, wind, and so on. But half of a big number is still a big number. Bitcoin uses a consensus mechanism called proof of work that uses all this energy. Most blockchains do not use proof of work. They've shifted to a newer technology called proof of stake, and they use hardly any energy to work. So that's point number one. Point number two is if you want to buy Bitcoin, here's where a Canadian company led. 9 Point Partners created the first ever green Bitcoin ETF, where all of the carbon in the Bitcoin that you buy, not just the purchase, but the actual existence of that Bitcoin is offset with carbon credits. Now, full disclosure, my son Alex is the head of digital assets at 9 Point, but you can just call up your broker and say, on the Toronto Stock Exchange, I want to buy some BITC, and you can buy green Bitcoin right now. So, yes, this is a problem, but it's going away.
So I'm just going to put a parentheses in. Signet, which we created from the get-go, was proof of stake, and we created it in a carbon so that it's carbon neutral. We put it on, we did that from the get-go, which is made sure that even though it's a much lower carbon footprint, it is still carbon neutral.
Nice.
Can you point to a country today, formally, informally, that are preparing our children? You talked about the next generation that are preparing our children to understand this new blockchain, cryptocurrency economy and providing essentially future financial literacy to the next generation.
We actually doing an informal analysis of different countries on this topic, and it's uneven, okay? So China is investing billions of dollars into each of half a dozen locations. And it's driving a lot of this in terms of blockchain, not in terms of public cryptocurrencies, because China's opposed to that and they want to control this through their CBDC. On a more positive note, you have countries like Switzerland that has created a regulatory environment where all of this can flourish. In Zug, there are, last time I checked, like 12,000 full-time people working in this space doing all kinds of stuff. And then there's all the ancillary businesses that flow around that. And overall, the problem here is that, as I described in Paradigm Shift, that this is a new mental model. That sort of paradigm is, and they put boundaries around what we think they constrain our actions. They're often based on assumptions that are so strong we don't know that they're there. And we have these old systems and old models and old financial system and old regulatory bodies and old governments that think in old ways. And it takes a while to create an awakening. And that's a big part of what we do at the Blockchain Research Institute, is we're trying to get the mud off the windshield and let people see what's actually happening here. So, we could talk about every country and sort of where it's at. Up until very recently, Silicon Valley was nowhere on this. And it posed an interesting question: where will the Silicon Valley of the second era of the internet be based? Because leaders of old paradigms have great difficulty embracing the new. That's one of the laws of paradigms.
Our new mayor in New York, Eric Adams, wants to make this the cryptocurrency capital. And in Miami, trying to do the same. So,
yeah, well, actually, New York, in our last analysis, was ahead of Silicon Valley on this.
So I want to do a few more questions here because we have a lot. We have a number of them. If someone wanted to get involved in NFTs and creating NFTs, because this is a community of a lot of artists and creators, what should they do? What would you think is their first step?
Well, if you're an individual, you need to go online and find out about NFTs and what they are. And then there are platforms like OpenSea where NFTs are traded, and you should go there and have a look and see what's going on. And it's not a super complicated thing. I mean, you think about, do I create something that could be digital, like art or music, or is there something in the physical world that I could represent? Where a lot of people would be interested in having something non-fungible. It can only be one version. Can I create the equivalent of the Mona Lisa, maybe 1 billion times less valuable or 100 million times less valuable? And then there are all kinds of companies that will help you create an NFT to represent that. It's not hard to do. If you're a company, then you should join the Blockchain Research Institute.org. And you're going to have all the deepest research that exists about NFTs in the world.
And I should only add that for listeners and for the audience, that you need to own the copyright to whatever you're doing an NFT for. Otherwise, in plain old-fashioned courts, you can be sued and you'll lose.
Yeah.
So that's just a bit of free advice. You got to be sure of that issue. So someone is asking, the limited supply, the Fed can print as much money as it wants. As a matter of fact, the one machine that worked very well and got a good workout over the last period of years, Fed printing press. But there are only 21 million Bitcoins. Does that become a problem, particularly when you have 71% of all Bitcoins owned by 2% of people? By 2% of the wallets. Versus, let's say, wealth, it's 10% of the of American wealth. Now I'm speaking in the United States, is owned, 70% of American wealth is owned by 10% of the households. It seems that there's more
2%,
concentration.
2% of the wallets?
Like 2% of individuals. Actually, I have some data. I can footnote that too, but
yeah.
I'm going.
We'll have to take that one offline because I don't think that's right. Yeah, mathematically, it'd be very, very difficult for 51% of all the owners of Bitcoin to get together and do something. There are a lot of them. So, but the fact that there are a finite number of Bitcoin is a feature, not a bug, as we would say in software. And it means that you can't print more. So their value is real, and it's going to go up based on what the market actually thinks and not some other consideration. It's not going to be devalued by somebody printing more Bitcoin, as in the case of the dollar.
So I want to add my words of thanks to you for this interview. It's been enlightening. People certainly know a lot more about blockchain 55 minutes into this interview than they did before. And now I am told that I need to turn this back to Hillary, who will wrap up. So again, thank you, Don.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. That was a great conversation. To be continued.
To be continued.
Thank you, guys. That was amazing. And we started the conversation, just for the audience, a while before we all even got on screen. And we had another conversation last week, and I could have this conversation or listen to this conversation all day long. It's just fascinating. So thank you both so much for being with us. And I'm sure you'll continue your conversations. And I know we have lots of questions, and we'll get to some follow-ups. If anybody wants to hand those over to us, we can get them to you. So thank you, everyone, for listening on that. So I also wanted to thank Helen Hatsis and Wayne Viner for being behind the scenes and making all of this possible. And thank, again, BST Canada, part of the BST group, a leading Israeli development and construction company that was established over 50 years ago, with operations in Canada for over 2 decades now, focusing on investing in commercial and residential real estate. VST Canada and their partners provide a hands-on approach to asset management and repositioning. I also want to thank all of our other generous supporters. Without your commitment, we could not create an impact and fulfill our purpose. And for those of you who would like to support Genius 100 so we can continue to provide these great talks and continue to make the impossible possible, please go to our donate button on our website. So as promised, as we wrap up, I have some terrific news to share as we wrap up today. Firstly, some of you might have seen the press from this week that the official announcement has come out about the future of education at the Festival of the Diaspora in partnership with the Aspen Institute. We'll be presenting live from San Juan on February 24th, where I'll be giving a keynote presentation, including a tribute to G100 visionary and spiritist, Sir Ken Robinson, and unveiling the G100 Future of Education report, developed from a proprietary research study we are conducting currently with 9 members of our visionary community from Afghanistan, Canada, India, Israel, Nigeria, and other places. And we'll conclude with the announcement of our 2022 visionary. Again, this event marks the launch of our partnership with Festival of the Diaspora, the Aspen Institute Project on Belonging, and Tulsa Innovation Labs. So speaking of education, our next webinar event is Thursday, March 3rd, in partnership with We Imagine If, which is the continuation of Sir Ken Robinson's foundational work. We will be delving into a conversation about knowledge. The episode will include a panel of remarkable women from our visionary community, Dr. Seema Samar of Afghanistan, Dr. Obi Esquizeli of Nigeria, Kate Robinson of the UK, and Maggie McDonald of Canada, who are, in real time, impacting millions of learners around the globe every day. This is what is sure to be a remarkable conversation. Will be led by my friend, collaborator, and G100 partner, Cordell Carter, founder of the Festival of the Diaspora and executive director of Aspen Institute's Socrates program. And stay tuned for the week of March 24th, in celebration of Einstein's birthday, will be our annual Genius 100 induction ceremony. Last year, we broadcast live from the International Space Station to induct astronaut Soichi Noguchi of Japan, so stay tuned on that one. And earlier this week, we also announced our 2022 judges for the Genius 100 Work of Genius Inspiration Award in partnership with the New York Festival Advertising Awards. This year, G100 Global Ambassador and famed actor James Caan has stepped up to take on the role of chairperson of this group of judges, and the visionary jury will include Jose Miguel Sokoloff of Low Mullen Worldwide, Seema Samar, and Don Tapscott, who we just saw here. This award was developed to honor the most impactful commercial creative work of the year. Submissions for 2021 are underway. G100 will be the only category of the festival this year to accept NGO and cause-related work. And lastly, do not forget, this coming Monday is Valentine's Day, and we have a perfect gift suggestion with the G100 gift of site Love You More campaign. That can be found on our website. We've also sent some emails around. That is sponsored by G100 community member Gabby Gorbani and founder of Love You More jewelry and accessory brand. She's created a special gift of site promotion to support our partner charity, Himalayan Cataract Project. So more information, if you'd like, is available on our website, or just send us an email at our Genius 100 addresses. And thank you so much for joining us again, and see you next time.